Now this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart because really, with a lot of experience, I honestly don't know how many deer I've shot. I hate to say 200 because I don't think it's been 200, but it's in that 150, 170, 140, it's somewhere around there. Past 100 many years ago when I used to care about or even keep track of that. I knew how many bucks I shot, and I don't know what it is anymore, and I don't really care. But the bottom line is, it's a lot of deer tracked, and not to mention everybody that I've hunted with. Friends calling and say, hey, can you help me track my deer? We all love doing that. And so right off the bat, I didn't grow up in a hunting family. And I think that was an advantage in some respects, because then I had to find experts, quote experts, people I knew that knew the most about whatever, and help me. And there was someone, his name was Al Bigger. Back in the day, was at our church. He's a wonderful man, great mentor. And you know, he said he's one of those men in church, hey, if you shoot a deer, give me a call and I'll come help you track it. So my first deer, I was around 16 years old. I know I wasn't 17, I know I was 15 or 16, I think. And I hit a deer. He told me just to get out and call. And so I did. After about 2 hours of tracking and going about 50 yards, he said, we're not going to find this deer dead tonight. He showed me how to look on one side of the log, the front side of the log, and not the back side, how to lift up leaves a little bit that seemed ruffled, see if there's any blood under it. We found some specks like that. We didn't find a lot of blood. He told me to come back in the morning, which was awesome for a 16-year or 14-year-old kid with my brother Kevin along, for us to take off school the next day and go out and look for this deer. We ended up finding it. It was a long story, but we were able to recover the deer. That was day one, folks. This was a long time ago. That taught me patience right off the bat and trying to make smart decisions right off the bat, right out of the gate. And so because of that, I can honestly say that I've lost, and it's bad even, but I've lost one deer that died on a neighbor's fence about a quarter mile away. That was back in the 90s. And then any other deer that I've hit, I've shot later, whether it was 3 weeks later, 10 days later, a year later. So although I looked and looked and looked and couldn't find deer, there's another one that ran onto a neighbor's property a mile away. I do remember that. I hit it in the leg, and we never found that deer. And I'm assuming someone else shot it at some point because it was not a fatal shot. But you don't have to lose deer very often. You know, bow hunters, and I'm not saying the bow hunters lose a lot of deer, but there's some out there that seem to lose deer time and time and again, and there's just no excuse for it. Let's put it that way. So this is near and dear to my heart because of that. You know, I remember back in the day at church, I remember someone talking about that they had wounded 4 deer that year and not recovered. It was kind of like just kind of inside. Not everyone knew that, but to me it was inexcusable. I didn't understand why, because if you follow these steps, you'll find your deer the majority of the time. Number one, follow and record. What do I mean by that? Record in your brain, record in your head, your eyes. Watch where that deer goes. And so that'll help you along the way. You know, long run, that's not going to make or break. But there's been so many times you look for an hour and a half for blood, first blood, when the deer ran a completely different direction than you thought. I remember my son Jake helped someone find a deer. He was hunting public land nearby up in the UP in Michigan. He came over to us. He was a neighbor, and he said, hey, I think a deer went on your land, and I just want to let you know. And you'd said you'd help me blood track, and he's colorblind. And I said, yeah, sure. So we went out there. The deer went the opposite direction of our land. Jake found some blood, followed that in the opposite direction, and it was easy to find. It didn't really go that far, but he couldn't find blood very well, and he thought it went one way. It went the exact opposite, and that happened so much in the excitement. So it pays to immediately start to calm down if you can. Watch where that goes. Just mark it with a tree, some major marker, tree, bush, or something that you can even go back to the stand and say, yeah, it was that right there. Just imprint it in your head. That's a really good start. Number two, calm down. Even if you know that deer went down in that hollow, I need help. Not sure of the hit, so I'm going to back out. Calm down first. No reason to get out of the stand a minute later, 2 minutes later while you're all jacked up. We make dumb decisions then, meaning like you're going down a ladder, you forget a rung with your foot or your hand. You just do things you shouldn't do. Maybe you forget something up in the stand, you go back again, you're increasing the risk. You all of a sudden, I don't want to strap in the lifeline again, I just go up and get it. And something bad happens. So just calm down. Enjoy the moment. And that's part of calming down, is really sit there and think, man, well, for one, now the work begins, but two, everything that led up to that. It's, as a hunter, it's an emotional experience. You know, there's times where I've gone up to a deer that we found and you feel like almost shouting. You're so excited. There's other times you have tears in your eyes and you found it. It's an emotional time. You sit down, quiet, reverence. It's a time to be thankful. And I don't like fake emotions. I don't like people that always have to yell, hoot, and holler. You know, you might do that occasionally. But bottom line is enjoying that whole time. You know, that's what our passion is. Most of us hunt the entire season, bow, gun, muzzleloader, or whatever it might be. You enjoy that, so really soak it in. I think back to times in my life, my senior year of high school, I remember my last baseball game, and I remember thinking, I'm not good enough to play in college, but I was good enough to play in high school. Played center field, stole a lot of bases, didn't hit the ball very far, didn't strike out a lot. I loved playing. I knew my limitations, didn't have a strong arm. But I remember my last game, last play, everything, because I knew that was the last time. It's no different than hunting. You just burned your tag. My Minnesota tag, my Wisconsin tag, it's done. You know, we're thinking now it's all of a sudden you're resetting to 365. You know, you're really resetting. So really enjoy that time. But calming down makes you safe. It helps you make good decisions, which is number 3, make smart decisions. What do I mean by that? Deer went one way. There's a good chance, if it's still alive, it's watching back. It's listening. You have to be very smart how you get out of your stand, very quiet. And when you leave your stand, you need to be very smart about which direction you go. Literally 10 steps towards where your arrow went, towards that deer was shot. That deer could hear you, see you from 100 yards away. And guess what? He wasn't going to run a half mile. Because of the shot, he felt sick. He's going to die. But now he will, and he's not going to have much blood. So he's going to run a half mile because you spooked him. That's the bad part about making bad decisions, and that's where a lot of people fail, is right at this point right here, because they shoot this deer is wary, now it's alert, even though it's sick, even though it's dying. It hears you get out of the stand, it sees you get out of the stand, it sees you walk 20 yards, go get your arrow just to look at some blood, and it's gone. And when it runs at that point and knows you're on its trail, it's running at least a half mile, and if you're in open hardwoods, big open hardwoods where there's not a lot of thick cover, that could be a mile. It could be 3/4 of a mile, and guess what? Not much blood. Really hard to find those deer. And that's where a lot of people fail. So you have that decision to make too. I'm not exactly sure where that arrow hit. And this is part of recording, following. Do you hear it crash? Do you hear it flailing, crashing, knowing it went down? A lot of deer that if they hit, you'll hear them typically 90% of the time. You'll hear them fall, you'll hear them flail within 10 seconds. Or they might stand for 15 seconds and then you hear it. But it's pretty soon. You know, those are hard because you maybe weren't sure of the shot, but you're sure that deer fell right there and he fell hard. So you might want to choose to go over there, look at your arrow. You're pretty sure that he went down, but it's always a risk. But if that deer just went, you didn't hear anything, you didn't hear a crash, you're not totally showing, you might even think, it's a little back. Then that's where the smart decisions come in. And we talk about time to die. Dylan mentioned coyotes. And meaning that coyotes, let's say a lot of people say, well, I got to blood track this deer. I got to go trail him right away. Well, if you push him, you're not going to find him if it's a poorly hit deer. And this is where coming back to making a good decision. Did you hear it crash? Were you really sure of the shot? Because most people always say they have a double lung, and they didn't, and that's why they change broadheads, that's why they change arrows, that's why they change bow, that's why they change with their kinetic energy, whatever. That's why they go to a faster arrow, a heavy arrow, whatever the reason, but it's their failures that led to equipment changes because no one believes that they couldn't have a double lung. So it takes very sharp criticism, and it's important to look at yourself and say, you know what, I failed. That's okay, we all do, we all have a fail rate. No one's perfect when it comes to bow hunting. We all have a fail rate when it comes to shot, but we shouldn't have a fail rate when it comes to tracking our deer. And that comes with knowing when to back out, when to walk away from the deer, when to make those smart decisions. And even coyotes, like I was going to mention, if you trail a deer with a bad hit because you think coyotes might find him before you do, you're never going to find that deer. You're going to push him a half mile again, 3/4 mile, you're not going to find him. Well, if he's laying dead there, then that's that gamble. But if you go into a deer, and that's the same with dogs, you hire a dog and that deer's not dead, you're probably never going to find that deer because it's going to push it miles and miles. I saw someone that looked at it, it was a GPS recording of their dog, a really good tracking dog for deer. Look, we never found the deer, but look at how well the dog did. It went 5.2 miles on that track. 5.2 miles across dozens of property lines, never found the deer. Maybe that deer died the next day. And maybe if that deer wasn't pushed, it'd be right there 200 yards from the stand. And that's part of the smart decision, because when a deer dies in their stick cover, it'll typically be within 200 to 300 yards, unless it heard you, saw you, or smelled you when you got out of your stand, about 95% of the time. That's where you could have a complete pouring rain, snowing. And if you know that direction that deer went, even if you got a bad hit, he's gonna be dead within 200 to 300 yards, and now you just have, yeah, it's a needle in a haystack, but you will find that deer if you search hard enough. You get a couple buddies to come help you out. So the risk is, yeah, it's raining, so we're gonna go in. Yeah, there's coyotes, we're gonna go in. Yeah, it's snowing, so we're gonna go in. But if it's a bad hit, you're never gonna find that deer. And that's the harsh reality that I've lived by. And yes, I've had one deer. Dylan, can you remember any? That since you've been hunting with me since 2016, no, that I've had coyotes eat, or part of eat. Sam, deer, my son, coyotes picked on. We left it overnight, but we still got some meat. And then I had one in Coon Valley in Wisconsin. I had one in 2011 that we had to go overnight. Let go overnight. He actually went 150 yards, but coyotes ate his hindquarters out. And so I've had a couple after all those deer I've left, and some areas are worse than others. We have a lot of coyotes around here. And that will skip over right now to leave some clothing. I have the clothing right here. That's what I've done. It just seemed like a smart thing to do 25 years ago. So if I left a deer in the woods overnight, I left an article of my hunting clothing as close as I thought I could without spooking that deer. But to make sure that if a coyote came in and found that scent of that coat, they'd leave. And that's what they do. We used to even like field trial for beagles, but we ran beagles on our property all the time, up to 7 beagles. We'd have our snowshoe trail going out, our beagle trail going out to different areas where we'd run. Coyotes come, hit that trail, and they'd immediately turn and run the other way. They wouldn't follow our trail, especially if it was fresher scent and tracks in the snow. They would hit it and leave. They don't want to be around us. They don't want to be around the dogs. They would just completely leave, and that's no different with your smelling coat. They come in. We left a couple does. What was that, Dylan, maybe 4 years ago? Yep. I shot in one night. We shot 2 does. We drug them right by each other. The next day we went out, and tracks were going to that blood trail, coyotes, and they eventually just turned off and left because they knew we were a part of the combination of that they didn't like. So really good to leave a coat nearby. That helps greatly. But bottom line is you have to make that decision to get in or out, and that's a big part of where people fail. I mean, making smart decisions, knowing when to back out, when to go, and not pushing that deer, because when you push it, you're not going to find it. Now the blood, what type of blood do you have? It's interesting, and we nailed it with Dante's deer the other day. We had bright lung blood to begin with. He said he hit a little bit back, and so we had bright lung blood to begin with, obviously hit a lung. Now the blood starts trickling down and gets dark. What's that mean? Arrow went through liver, 1 lung, liver, dead deer. Not because of the 1 lung, but because of the liver. Then when the deer went downhill, it started pouring out, which is typical of liver. Now we had given that deer 3 hours. With a liver shot deer, if it's mid liver, high liver, that's 45 minutes. If it's low liver, just a little bit back, we had Diego in 2016, that's a day and a half, unfortunately. That's just right behind the heart, folks. Looks like a really good shot. It'll take a while. Intestines, watery, clear blood. If that's where you think the arrow went in and out, it wasn't like you went in 1 lung, hit a liver, went out the intestine. But if it's clear, that could take 2 days, day and a half. I've heard of 3 days. Sick deer, it's horrible. Give it time to die, gut shot, 5 hours. But you get in on these deer and you've given it 3, 4, 5 hours, or a daytime or a nighttime, and you go out there. If it's still alive and it's not going to die for a day, have your bow ready. Gave it the day, it's still daylight. Have your bow ready. Most of the time you can put that deer down. And it's very important. That's why it's important to, when you're trailing, you talk about slowing down, tracking skills overall. You can read the blood. You can look at deep, bright, medium blood, heart blood. You can look at foamy blood for lungs and bright blood. You can look at dark blood for liver, food blood for guts. It take 5 hours. Watery blood for intestine, take a day or more. Take a long time. We can look at all of that. We can look at something with a little bit of bone in it. Maybe you hit brisket. Maybe you got some fat. There's some white hair on the arrow, so you know you hit it in the belly. There's all these signs for blood tracking to make sure of when you should go in or how long it's going to take for that deer to die. But really, you need to slow down. And that's even, we were tracking Dante's deer the other night. Gave it 3 hours. We found him stiff. He actually made a big hook. And something that Dylan likes to point out is zoom out and really look at the big picture where he's going. But I had more of a spotlight flashlight, and I encourage you to have good flashlights. We use Olight, not because they sponsor me or anything. I had a spotlight flashlight, and I could scan ahead. So I'm right behind Dante, and the whole time I'm looking I'm following Dante because I just keep asking him, you on blood, you on blood? But I'm looking up ahead because I want to see if those eyes are looking back at me. Then we have to stop and assess. Is this something that he needs to go in with a knife, which is dangerous if it's a buck? Do we need to back out? Can we back out in the situation we're at? Is he going to get up and run? So you need to make a smart decision right there. But bottom line is slowing down when you're tracking, looking ahead, scanning ahead, and like Dylan says, look at the big picture. You know, zoom out on your aerial photos with HuntWise, mark where you've been, and look and scan the area. And where this buck was going is he actually started at top, went out a point, went down, went behind Dante, and he was going to a crossing on the road. He probably lived across the road. It's not a major highway. And because of a steep gorge, he was just working along the edge on a deer trail and a bench to actually cross where the deer crossed to get to the other side. The cover's thinning down right there. It comes into a steep area. It just turns right, goes across the road. Pretty easy. Now, if we would have lost that blood trail, we could have skipped ahead 250 yards to that point and said, yeah, cross the road right here. Or it didn't. Meaning we know that deer is in that section right there because that's where he was going. Look at funnels. Look at edges of habitat. Dylan was talking about, you know, we've done this before too, like deer's going that direction, deer trail, it has to kind of pinball through there. We lose a blood trail. Well, we just skip ahead 1/4 mile because that's where we have to come into, and all of a sudden, hey, there's blood right there. Or there's blood 200 yards away. You just keep following that general direction because you know it's going here. You know it's going to this swamp. You know it's going to this bench. You know it's crossing between corners of woods into this other woods. Even if it's 500 yards away, it's going towards that woods. I found deer that way before too, in a ditch system on the other side of a small wood lot where it went through the woods, went through the ditch to go to another woods that was 500 yards away. That's what they did in the thumb area. It's flat, small wood lots, and there's that deer laying in that ditch. One of my first bucks, by the way, back in the 90s. Mike Pratt was with me, a friend of mine, helping with that one. The bottom line is slowing down, being very patient, methodical. Do you jump it? What do you do? This is a hard one. If that looks really injured, I'm running after it. I want to stay close with that, especially during daylight, obviously, so I can catch up to it and get another shot. But if it's taken off running and it's been sitting, you're better off assessing where that might go, backing out and going back 3 or 4 hours later and trying to pick up that track and really going on. I don't like you jump it. It's obviously, what it tells me is that it's got the ability to jump again. So maybe it falls down half mile later. You don't want to go push it again and make it run and stress it out. You want to let it die. I think sometimes it seems like, and that gets us into dog tracking, where you can take a deer that would have died when mortally hit and not even moved out of its bed, and that's where it assesses the dog tracking to me. If the deer's dead and you know it, then call a dog tracker. Awesome skill and resource for you if they're legal in your state to come out and help you with that deer. But if it's still alive, you can really do a lot of damage by continuing to push that deer, not only to the deer, but finding that deer. It's going to stress it out, push it more. Just let it lay down and die peacefully. There's some tips right now. You know, talk about a good flashlight. We use rechargeable lights. It's interesting. One of the lights I was using this year, the spotlight, I charged it last year. Some of these lights are good lights. Yeah, they're $100 plus, but they're good lights and they'll last you many, many years. And they'll last you long time with no batteries to purchase. Really easy to charge, and most of them, if you buy different models within that manufacturer, they still use the same charger. Make sure of that too. Our Olights have that. So I have a spotlight. I have the headlamps that we use for tracking. I don't use them for walking in the woods. To get to my stand, they're too bright. I have the smaller lights that go down to 1 lumens, half lumens, where you can barely put any light down in the trail. They call it moonlight. Or they go up to 1,000 lumens, 1,000 times greater. Think of that, how bright they can be. So different lights right there. Make sure you give it time to die. Leave some clothing in the woods. But this is really, when you're going through this, make a methodical progression through these steps, making sure you're slowing down, calming, make good decisions. I guess what I'll leave you with all these points right here is, if you push that deer out of his bed that he would have otherwise died in, because that's the way it works, folks. You push him. Don't blame your equipment. Don't blame anything else. You pushed him. He goes a half mile to a mile. 95% chance you are not going to find him unless a neighbor helps you, someone gives you a call, whatever, but you're going to push him and you're not going to find him. So that's probably the #1 thing I could leave you with. You always have to have that back and know the risk, understand the risk if you push that deer. And a lot of people say, oh, we never saw a bed. Well, mature buck will stand there for 45 minutes and bleed. Just because he didn't lay down didn't mean he didn't stand there. He didn't hear you coming. He didn't see you. They don't necessarily have to lay down. And a lot of people, in the hurry of the moment and when you're all jacked up, can't wait to find that deer, you don't notice that you just walked right by a bed or walked through a bed. It's not that evident. Most beds that have been used for days at a time are evident. Most beds that have been used for an hour are not, even with the lack of blood, because he could be laying on that wound and no blood's coming out. Maybe not much blood is coming out at that point. Maybe it's just getting soaked in the hair on the side of them. The hole's open towards the top. Bottom line, a lot of this gets kind of bloody, kind of gory. We're talking about a lot of things that we'd rather not happen. If these deer, bottom line is, if we're practicing making good shots, bad things happen. Thankfully, bad things don't happen very often. But when they do, we have a lot of times no one to blame but ourselves. So always remember that risk of jumping that deer and make smart decisions. And then you'll find that if you shoot 100 deer, you lose 3 or 4. I'm not saying that's a good thing. That's a whole lot better than 50% or 25%, whatever that number might be. You shoot 10, you want to find majority or all of those deer. You want to give yourself a chance. Some people aren't giving themselves a chance before they ever leave the tree stand. So practice patience, make smart decisions, slow down, and you will find your deer the vast, almost super majority, almost 100% of the time. I urge everyone out there to really check out my web classes. They've been wildly successful. We have one that details how you should design your land, another one that details how you should plant and maintain and manage a food plot program. How can you make those decisions that fit your land specifically and not someone else's? Unfortunately, there's so much information in the hunting industry that says you should do this, but it doesn't apply to you. These web classes directly apply to you. And then we have our 3rd web class that came out last year, Rut Web Class, navigating the entire rut. And then we have our 4th one coming out, which is hunting hills and thermals. I urge you to check those out, try the web classes, and they're all about teaching, helping you understand how you can navigate, not only managing your property, food plots, and the rut, but also hunting strategically, hills, thermals, and wherever you pursue whitetails for your dream and your passion.